I'm very happy to be here. And today I'll talk about how we can actually use human insights about the structure of the problem in order to make scientific discoveries. And this is the main topic of my thesis at Cornell, but this has been a joint work with many different people, including, of course, my advisors, Carla Gomez and Bart Selman at Cornell, also students. I have to say Yeshan Schur, Stefano Herman now at Stanford, and Rich Bernstein, also some work with Ashish here, and but also people outside of CS. So this is in collaboration with material scientists at Cornell and at Caltech. So this is Bruce Vandover at Cornell and John Gregor at Caltech. So to position this work into this context, I would say that this is at the intersection of combinatorial reasoning, optimization and learning, and human computation. Now, oh, this one died. Okay. So basically, on one side, combinatorial reasoning allows you to capture specificities of the problem, discrete characteristics, decision rules, and various options and possibilities. And yet this, as you know, brings the challenge of the high dimensionality of the search space. On the other side, optimization and learning allows you to shape the search space in order to take into account optimization criteria, preferences and utilities, and noise, for example. And as you know, it brings in challenges in terms of dealing with uncertainty, limited practical limitations in terms of representation, and limited information. And the novelty of this work actually lies in terms of how to use human computation to complement these techniques to bridge reasoning and learning and to boost combinatorial optimization. So, so this work has led to a series of results, including in graph theory, combinatorics, discrepancy theory. That's for the more theoretical side, but also it has many practical applications, as you can see here, with a focus on sustainability-related applications, including results in materials discovery, design of experiments for sustainable practices of fertilizers, wildlife conservation, and ecology. And to be able to solve these hard combinatorial problems and actually scale up their solution, the key insight has been to exploit the structure of the problem. And I don't claim that this is new. This is not a new concept. People have been using, for example, submodularity of the objective function or tractability of the subproblem, for example, for quite a long time. And but yet, the novelty here is actually to use a human computation component to crowdsource and get insight about the hidden structure of the problem. And but what exactly do I mean by structure of the problem? And I think that's something that is difficult to formally define, whether it be mathematically or algorithmically. But I claim that this is something that is part of our human abilities to recognize structure. Basically, structure, you know it when you see it. And to illustrate that point, please take a look at these 6 plots for just a few seconds. And is there one or more that is more structured than the other? And you may have noticed that the second plot actually has something special to it. So not knowing what you're looking at, or even knowing what you should be looking for, you may have identified the second plot to be the odd one out. And what's interesting about this problem is actually these are all 6 solutions to the same problem in graph theory. And yet, if you focus on the second one, you'll be able to derive construction rule and to generalize solutions to this problem for any graph. And let's take a look at a second example now. Here, again, not knowing what you are looking at, not knowing what you should be looking for. And you may have noticed that the first plot has something special to it. And in fact, I did an experiment with roughly 100 people, including high school students and people from Amazon Mechanical Turk. And about 80% of them identified a pattern made of all the visible lines that you see here and of the vertical lines. And if you provide this information as input to a combinatorial solver, what comes out is a way more meaningful interpretation of the data. And we'll come back to this example later on. Yes? Sure.
I'm just curious, what was going on with the other 20%? Did you look at that at all?
Yeah, that's right. Some of them did not provide any information at all, just skipped to the task. Some said that there is a bit of noise here, so it's not exactly the right pattern, so they identified 2 patterns. But yeah, that's right. I think 80% is as good as it gets when we're talking about input from Amazon Mechanical Turk, for example. But yes? These, yeah, we'll come back to what these actually is. These are, this is real data in a materials discovery project. These are X-ray diffraction data that are stacked on top of each other. So I'll explain this later. But
I just wondered if you played them as an audio sound or something, if people would recognize the first one as being more structured.
No, these are actually X-ray diffraction patterns. But we do have another project in the elephant listening project where we have people listening at audio recordings, and they actually identify elephant calls. So that's a different project. All right. So the research question that I'm addressing here is whether or not we can actually use human insights to discover and exploit hidden structure in combinatorial optimization problems. And this is the motivation of this work. In the first part, I'll talk about discoveries in discrete mathematics, and then I'll show you how the same ideas can be applied to crowdsourcing for backdoors for a particular problem in material science. All right, so first I'll start with a very brief history of discoveries in discrete math. And at first, we were quite optimistic that first-order theorem proving would be able to solve many math problems. And yet, the representation language turned out to be too general and pretty much unconstrained in order to effectively explore the huge search space of most interesting math problems. And still, there has been some success stories here of automated reasoning. For example, the existence of orthogonal Latin squares, the proof that the four-color theorem is true, the proof that Robin's algebras are in fact Boolean algebras, and also more recently the proof of a particular case of Erdős conjecture in discrepancy theory. And yet there are only a few success stories like this. And as you go from almost full manual proofs to fully automated proofs, the size of the proof itself has increased exponentially. And we've reached proof sizes now that are like longer than the entire Wikipedia put together. And not only can we no longer read the proof and barely validate it, we now have lost track of any understanding of why actually the theorem is true. And with it, basically all insight that would help us actually scale up the solutions and generalize the proofs. So the question is, can we actually understand how certain complex objects can be constructed directly using a human understandable strategy? And to answer this question, I'm going to use an example domain, the design of scientific experiments for sustainable practices of fertilizers. And first, I'll show how it actually relates to the area of discrete mathematics. And so in order actually to compare various soil treatments, such as fertilizers, for example, agronomic labs have to devise experimental designs to test and to best assess the quality of the soil treatments, the fertilizers. And basically, better experiment designs will translate into a better assessment of their quality and their impact on the environment. And first, to test these treatments, they typically distribute the treatments evenly here over the test plot. Here you have 4 different treatments, and in the first replication, you try all the different treatments you have, the second replication, the second row, you're going to try them all, but in a different order, so that you don't try the same treatment twice on the same plot. And this is not only what you have to enforce in this problem, because you want to eliminate the correlation bias as much as possible. And basically, the fact that two treatments might be always next to each other in a design might actually have an impact on the assessment of the quality of the fertilizer. And that's why agronomic people in agronomy at Cornell came up with the structure of spatially balanced Latin square that address this issue for the design of experimental design. And so basically, there is this structure that is called the spatially balanced Latin square problem that capture what they wanted to have for the design of fertilizers. And so you start with a square, n by n square. And each symbol or color here is going to represent a different fertilizer or different treatment. And as I was saying, you try all the treatments in each row, and you don't put the same treatment twice in the same plot, in the same column, basically. And this gives you the Latin square structure. And on top of this, do you want to make sure that the average distance between any pair of symbols is going to be the same for any pair? And that's basically to avoid the correlation, the spatial bias in terms of the assessment of the quality of the treatment. So here, let's look at the pair red and green, for example. You'll see that they are one column apart in the first row, there are 4 columns apart in the second row, and so on, and for a total of 14. And you want this total to be the same for all the pairs of symbols. And in that case, you would get what they call the spatially balanced Latin square. And this problem turns out to be quite a computationally challenging design problem. So back in now 12 years ago, using constraint programming, you could generate in order of minutes about a solution like this of order 9. And the largest ever known spatially balanced Latin square back in 2005 is of order 35 and took actually weeks, about 2 weeks of computation to actually compute and get this solution. And yet, it was conjectured that there might actually exist arbitrarily large spatially balanced Latin square, and there might actually be an effective way to construct that. And in this work, we provide the first polynomial time algorithm that is actually able to generate these spatially balanced Latin squares, at least for any order where the order is n is such that 2n plus 1 is prime. And this is as fast as it gets, as you can fill up this square in n square time. And to generate this one, it took like milliseconds, as opposed to weeks of computation for the other one of size 35. And so now we actually can generate an infinite family of spatially balanced Latin squares in polynomial time. And now I'll delve into the proposed framework that allowed us to actually come up with the first polynomial time construction for this problem. And I'll start with the concept of streamlining. And basically the goal is in streamlining is to basically exploit the structure of some of the solutions of your problem in order to dramatically boost the effectiveness of the propagation. And one main underlying observation is that if you try to keep all the solutions at once, there is a hard practical limit in terms of the effectiveness of the propagation methods. And often that means that there is no compact representation of all the solutions at once. And the other conjecture, underlying conjecture, is that often in many different combinatorial problems, if there are solutions, there are some solutions that are actually regular, that have some additional structure to them, and that's what we'll focus on using streamlined search. So basically, what streamlined streamlining this is a strong branching mechanism pretty high in the search tree, where you're going to discard a lot of the search space by focusing on a much smaller solution space. And by that, not only do you end up with a substantially smaller space, but also you will benefit from a much stronger filtering thereafter done in the search tree. So basically, you can see that as a really bold move, saying, I bet there are solutions that have this property, so I'm going to focus on them and now only look for them. Of course, if you were wrong, you may have to backtrack and go back to the other side of the search tree. And the second concept of the framework is taking advantage of human insights. And as I was presenting in the motivation of this work, I claim that we are pretty good at recognizing patterns and regularities, assuming you are looking at the right representation. Here, for example, if you look at these two plots here, one of them seems to be more regular than the other. I also claim that we are good at correcting irregularities. So if you see this broken star here, you know what you would actually take to make it a full star. Sorry. And finally, I also claim that we're pretty good at generalizing and formalizing regularities. So if you see a solution for a smaller size solution, like a Latin square like this, you can infer, assume what, actually conjecture what would be a good way to make this solution bigger. And so that's the second component. Now I'm going to show you the actual user interface that we've been using for this human-guided streamlined search. In the panel on the right, the user can actually specify a streamliner. So again, this means a structure, additional structure on top of the problem. For example, they may want to say that the first row, the first replication of the fertilizers, you're going to use all the fertilizers from 1 to n and in that order. So that might be an additional streamliner that you implement here. And in the next panel here, you can select the streamliners that you came up with, the parameters for the search, and then perform the search, either locally or on your cluster. And here, you have access to all the solutions that were generated so far, and you can actually select them so that in this panel, you actually visualize the solution that you were able to generate. And then this is the pretty iterative process where you keep generating different streamliners. So here's the formal description, and I'm going to give you an overview of the proposed framework. So you start by analyzing smaller size solutions, and you conjecture potential regularities in the solutions that you've been able to generate. And then you validate through streamlining some conjectured regularities. And if you cannot actually generate larger size solutions, it means that these regularities were quite likely accidental. And then you have to look for a new pattern in the small scale solutions. But yet, if you are able to generate a number of new solutions, then all of them will have the new regularity that you conjectured. And as the combinatorial objects grow bigger and bigger, you'll see that new regularities tend to reveal themselves. And so let's go through a couple of iterations of this framework, where you start with the standard parameters for this problem, where you look for specially balanced Latin square of order 3, which is the smallest size possible. And now you try and solve this and see here you were able to generate, let's say, 3 different specially balanced Latin squares. By looking at them, you may conjecture that one of them is symmetric in terms of the main diagonal, or there's one that is cyclic. So this is going to go into your pool of different streamliners that you may use afterwards. And So after that, you try and solve for 5, but cannot generate any solution. So now you are going to also make sure that you look for solutions that are symmetric. And then you run the search again. Then basically going up to order 6 this time, looking for combinatorial objects of order 6. Assuming you cannot find any solution, you need to strengthen the set of streamliners that you are using. Now you're looking for cyclic and symmetric. If you time out, or actually you perform a exhaustive search, fail search, meaning that you couldn't find any solution with these properties, now you backtrack and try other streamliners. Yes?
So when you say you in conjectured, I assume that means a person.
Yes, in this case it's a person.
So the thing that I find surprising in this setup is that given that it's relatively cheap to test, right, whether the approach generalized to larger squares, you couldn't mechanize the different, conjectural, like check for symmetry, etc., and have a huge amount of automatically generated possibilities and then test them.
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's what I wanted to do in the first place. But some work has been done on this, and not as successful because extracting the structure is a bit of a chicken and an egg problem. If you know what you're looking for, then you can infer it and try. Now, I've seen some papers trying to extract constraints out of some of the solutions using first order logic. Hasn't been that successful. But here, that's where we actually need humans to say, oh, I'm going to try this specific structure. But yes?
How do they communicate that to you?
So yeah, in the, going back to, basically this is using, I think I'm going to use my clicker. In this panel here, actually the user can specify, this is using the iLog CP Optimizer API. And this basically, you need to encode the constraint that you want, and this is going to be compiled on the fly and added to your search, basically. Yes?
What kind of training do you need to do this? Like, do you have to be a mathematician? Or?
Yeah, for this one, we are looking at people that are at least, they know what they should be looking at, which is different from the second part of the talk, where we're actually trying to move away from having expert, and then we rely on like any lay person that can provide insightful information about the problem. But yeah, that's a great question too. So the second part is, how can we have similar problems, but with people from the crowd that know nothing about the problem? Okay, so now here are some successful key streamliners for this problem, and you'll see how actually we can quickly scale up the solutions that we obtain. So if you try with, let's say, a 60 seconds timeout, you can generate solution up to order 6 without any streamliner. Now, if you impose on top of this that you want the solution to be symmetric with respect to the main diagonal, you can scale up to order 9. And if on top of this you impose that it's reduced, meaning that you have the first row that is ordered, as I was saying, but also the first column, now you limit the search quite a bit. You can generate all specially balanced Latin square of order 5, 6, and 8, and some of them of order 9. And you'll see that as we look at the sequence of these different specially balanced Latin square, you'll see that there is some regularity that starts to reveal itself. So if we focus on, let's say, this one of order 14, you'll see that there is a pattern to it, where so it has to be reduced. That was imposed. So you have all the numbers from 1 to 14 in the first row. But now in the second row, you see that something is striking. At least you can see that there is this different sequences. So the second column is actually, you see you go from by increment of 2. And then once you reach the limit, you'll see that it's actually decrementing by 2. And the same thing happens in the third row, but with increment of 3 and decrement of 3 as you reach the limit. And actually, you can characterize this special imbalanced Latin square exactly with this procedure, basically, that is using what the patterns that you see here, this increment and decrement based on the actual row that you are in. And you can prove that this is a valid construction for a order n, anytime 2n plus 1 is prime. And basically, this is the first polynomial time construction algorithm for the special balanced Latin square problem. And I think what's exciting about this is that typical approaches provide solutions to a given problem. And yet, this approach provides solution to an infinite family of problems. And I think what's also exciting is that this is used in a commercial tool in agronomic design. All right, so so this is a quite simple yet effective approach. As a matter of fact, we've been able to implement a dozen problems like this, all using the same framework and the same interface. And so this is true for specially balanced Latin square. We have Wicksure numbers, diagonally ordered magic squares, Costas arrays, graceful double wheel graphs, and so on. And here I'm showing you a series of results. So the results on the specially balanced Latin square that was able to close this, that was like 8-year-old open problem at that time. Then we have some results on the Wicksure numbers where we could improve the best bound of some Wicksure numbers. A year after that, we actually were able to prove that double wheel graphs are actually graceful. This was if I remember, it was like a 5-year-old open problem, and now it's closed. We proved that for any size, double wheel graphs are actually graceful. We have some results on diagonally ordered magic squares as well. And last year, now it's almost 2 years now, have some results on the Erdos discrepancy problem where we were able to scale up the solutions from about a sequence of 14,000 binary values, basically, up to a sequence of 0 ones of size over 127,000 long sequence. And so these are the various results that we have. Yes, Ashish?
So as you go from one application to another, what is changing? Is it the framework changing? Is it a domain expert that's looking at this to identify patterns that's changing?
Yeah, so the code is such that it's pretty easy to adapt from one problem to another. One key thing is for you to know what is the visualization, your representation that you should be using. And so for example, these, you can represent these easily as a matrix. And in that case, that's why we can generalize to all these different problems. Now, for example, there was a problem that I mentioned earlier, the Van der Waals numbers, for example. A good representation for that is actually a graphical representation that would allow, well, actually, that would require you more work in terms of if you want to use this interface. So, yes, you need to adapt going from one problem to another. Also, here, in terms of level of expertise that you need, these are roughly, these, I would say, the first 4 are roughly in the same domain. The third one may require another expertise in terms, this is in Ramsey, closer to Ramsey theory. So that may not be the same people that should be looking at the same problem. Yes? Bill?
Two questions.
Yes.
Quickly checking my understanding of the problem. So when you construct the solution space posed by humans, you're actually narrowing down. You're not getting the entire solution.
Yeah.
Decomposition. Okay.
Yeah, that's
So my
right.
second question is, for these problems, there's really clear representation of, okay, these are the numbers. We learn how numbers increase 1 by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are patterns that you can easily leverage. I wonder, so the first example that you gave, humans has defined symmetry and diagonal.
Yes.
For these different domains of math problems, the rules that humans define, do they overlap most of the time? Like the patterns they recognize, the simple patterns, do they often can be generalized to harder problems as you said, or do they define
Yeah.
completely different ones?
Okay, so to answer the first question, yes, we are narrowing down the search to a much smaller search space so that you might be discarding many different solutions. So this is not guaranteed to find a solution even if there is one. And this is also only for the constructive side of the search. If you want to prove that there is no solution, which is going to be the case in this problem, for example, if you have a sequence that is one larger than this, it's going to break. And for that, I cannot prove this using this approach. So because then you would have to prove that there is no solution. And so I use a SAT solver for that. It took quite a long time. The proof is 88 million lemmas. And it's huge, but this is not through this approach. This approach is constructively finding solutions. The second question you have is whether the different properties, regularities overlap between the different problems. Yes, they do, but the ones that are successful are not necessarily overlapping. So usually symmetry is a good example, as you were saying, but it, for example, does not apply to this construction. So
How many overall unique number of rules that they've defined over all these problems?
quite a few. I would say, yeah, the space is pretty big. Yes. More? Yeah.
How many of these open theory problems did you apply this technique to in order to get these 5 success?
That's a great question too. Over a dozen, because at least that's what I use this framework for. Yeah, to have these 5 success stories, I would say between 12, 14 maybe different open problems. Yes, that's a good question. Even though, so for example, I tried Ramsey numbers, and it's not shown here, so I wasn't that successful on this problem. But yeah, good. All right. Yes.
These 5 problems, how many people made the breakthroughs? Like 5 experts or 1 expert?
Yeah, so here that was mainly within our lab for the spatial balance Latin square, and I had it's pretty like 5 people looking at this problem, for example, and but that's it. Yeah. So now we're actually jumping to a problem where this one we're talking about 100 different people, but again, on each subtask, we ask roughly 5 people to provide input. So that we do have redundancy in terms of the input we have on the task we ask, but not too much, so that you can cover a lot of the problem itself. So I'll jump right in because I'm going to have to move on here to the second part on how we can apply similar ideas to crowdsource for backdoors in materials science. So, okay, I have 12 minutes left. I'm going to go over this pretty quick. Many of you may know what this is about. So in terms of hidden structure in hard combinatorial problems, as you know, worst case scenario, you need exponential time to solve a NP-hard problem. Yet in many real-world problems have a lot of hidden tractable substructure to them, and basically that means that if you can exploit this structure, you get much shorter solution times. And a key notion here is the notion of backdoor variables. And a backdoor to a given problem is a set of variables that once you assign them a value, the remaining instance simplifies to a tractable class. And you can see that as a clever reasoning shortcut in the search space. So it has been shown actually that in real-world problems, you may have surprisingly small backdoors. So here, look at this planning formula where we have roughly 800 variables, 7,000 constraints, and the size of the backdoor is roughly 16. Here's what the formula looks like. So the nodes are the variables, the constraints are the edges. And once you set 5 of these critical variables, here's what the graph looks like. After setting about just 12 out of those 800, but finding the right ones, the problem now is almost solved. And this is also true for infeasible problems. So here with the problem with roughly 400 variables, 2,500 constraints, there is a strong backdoor of size 3. If you assign these three variables, you can prove that there is no solution to that problem. And so this is the concept of backdoors. Now, let's delve into our motivating application here, which is the need for new sustainable materials. This is in collaboration with people at Caltech, John Gregor, people at Cornell in material science, Bruce Vandover. And it's started with this DOE panel on new science for sustainable energy future, saying that if we keep going on our existing energy approaches, that won't be enough to secure our energy future. And basically, we need scientific breakthrough in terms of new materials. And the White House Materials Genome Initiative was able to inject quite a bit of money in this problem in order to accelerate the pace and reduce the cost of discovery and also the deployment of advanced material system. And I think this is a very exciting new research area in CS at the intersection of big data, where we have huge amount of data in terms of all the different libraries, and I'm going to describe the data a little bit more in the next slide. And also that requires new computational tools to analyze all this data. So here's the concept of high throughput materials discovery, where you start with let's say a silicon wafer that big, and on it you're going to spatter different materials, different metals, let's say aluminum, lithium iron, so that you end up with a composition spread thin film on top of your silicon wafer. And then you take your wafer, you go to your favorite synchrotron source. Here it's me operating at Chess at Cornell. So you put the wafer in front of the beam, the X-ray diffraction beam, and you look at the beam intensity as a function of the diffraction angle. And this will allow you to characterize one of the points you have on the wafer, and you do that for many different points. Now, the bottleneck of this approach is being able to analyze all the X-ray diffraction patterns that you have in this problem to make sense of what's going on your silicon wafer. So this is what they call the phase map identification problem, okay, where basically you start as an input, you have all the different samples on your silicon wafer. For each of them you have a X-ray diffraction pattern, and you want to make sense of them by finding a subset of phases here that so that once you put, and basically what their X-ray diffraction pattern is and where they appear on the silicon wafer, these are basically the building blocks, the different crystal structures that appear on this wafer, so that once you recombine them, you can explain all the data that you observe. And for that, there are many different physical characteristics underlying this problem. So basically, you know that every crystal is a combination of different crystal structures, up to m of them in that case, and that is basically a linear combination of X-ray diffraction patterns of these phases. Now, once you go from one small crystal like this and you make it bigger by alloying, for example, the X-ray diffraction pattern may actually shift. And this would allow you basically to take this pattern and make it shift to the left before you merge it into another one. And then we have other constraints in terms of the amount of the phase that you are using should be smooth in that composition space, and that it should be connected. So this map also should be connected, and so on. These are all the physical characteristics that the material scientists provide us. And so you can actually come up with a constraint programming approach to very well capture what's going on. And this was our first attempt. And this was a new approach, and but yet for a reason that this was not used, because I think this, well, it doesn't really scale to full scale realistic instances. Especially there is poor propagation in terms of once you have noise in your problem. So this allows you to really capture what's going on, but you cannot solve big instances, basically. Now, that's why we turned to the crowd and we were asking, how can we decompose this problem and ask valuable input from either an expert or a lay person in order to provide this valuable input to our solver and then solve again and see whether we can actually scale up the solution. So the first task was actually to decompose that problem so that people from Amazon Mechanical Turk could solve this for us. And the main insight here is to actually use the same representation material scientists are using. This kind of spectrogram representation here. This is stacking up a X-ray diffraction pattern like this, where you convert this into a color-coded map, where you see you have all the different peaks here. And now you can stack them up, where you stack the X-ray diffraction for these 6 different points, and you get this heat map that represent the X-ray diffraction patterns for these 6 points on that slice. And now we are going to show them one of these slices and ask them, do you see, can you identify patterns in that? And here we do have about a 45-minute tutorial to ask them, to tell them what we expect by pattern. So to tell them what they should be looking for. The fact that basically the vertical blobs should behave similarly, they should actually have the similar range and so on. So we provided all these different examples that may happen in real life. And after that, we asked them to, for example, looking at this target row here, can they provide patterns that intersect that row? And here you see a completed task where the human provided 2 patterns, one in orange, one in blue. The first orange pattern covers these 3 peaks here, and the second pattern covers these 3 vertical blobs. And then after that, you take all the input from the mechanical Turkers, and you feed that into our solver, basically. And what's I think very exciting here is you see not only it significantly boosts the search. Here we go from about 13 hours down to like roughly 16 minutes of CPU time here. But it also allows us to semantically define and identify backdoors. And but what's actually even more exciting is that how it improves the quality of the solution that we get. And this is, I think, a really very exciting results about a new catalyst. This is the palladium tantalum rhodium system. And if you recall from the motivation, this was the slice I was showing you in the first place. And if you use input about what's going on that slice, saying that, oh, they identified this pattern made of all the vertical patterns that you see here, and then you try and solve this problem, what we get out of this is the most meaningful representation of this data. And what's actually even more exciting is that the phase that we identify here corresponds to this area, which is basically now known as the best platinum-free catalyst for fuel cells. And we are hoping that this could be, as you know, platinum is pretty expensive, and they are looking for a substitute to platinum. And hopefully, this is a pretty good candidate for catalyst in fuel cells. So in conclusion, I have 33 seconds left. Basically, the framework that we propose combines human insights with the state-of-the-art reasoning and optimization solvers for scientific discovery. And I presented results in finite mathematics, basically the first polynomial time procedure for spatially balanced Latin squares. But we also have results on the Wickstrom numbers, graceful graphs, Erdos discrepancy problem, and the magic squares here. And also results on in-material discovery, which is, I believe, a very exciting area for CS. And first, we were able to boost the interpretation of the X-ray diffraction patterns using crowdsourced input. And also, on top of this significant overall performance gain for the phase map identification problem, now we believe to have the first platinum-free material for better catalyst properties. And with that, I'm happy to take questions.